Alright, I am here today to talk about Honeybees in Distant Thunder by Riku Onda and translated by Philip Gabriel. This is going to be, I can already tell, just one of those long reviews, so I'm really looking forward to the coughing cacophony. We're up to a great fucking start. That's going to come after this one. So anyway, I don't even know where to start with this shit. Why did I pick up this book? I picked up this book way back when because very, very popular book in Japan, very, very popular author in Japan. Yoru no Picnic is one of her huge books in Japan. Curiously, has never been translated into English. But this one had, and translated by Philip Gabriel, who has done some of the Murakami works of decent length and is a popular Japanese contemporary work of literature. So that pretty much ticks so many boxes for me that, I absolutely picked it up, but I didn't get into it for a long time because it's about music, and as I've said in my previous videos, I have kind of an aversion to books that are kind of about sentimental, that get into this more sentimental side of things like sports and music for reasons that I will get into later. And the plot summary is, and there is a kind of slight plot summary on the inside of the book, but I think that it really doesn't capture quite the ensemble that the book is, because it's about a piano competition that takes place, and it's in Japan, and it's a fairly large piano competition, and the Yoshigai. I always struggle with seeing this in Romaji. Yoshigai International Piano Competition. And there are several different storylines. The main storyline follows three characters, three of the participants, but Aya, who is a piano... This is where it's really hard, because I already want to get into one of my major complaints with the story. But Aya, who was a genius, but who her mother died and she had a traumatic incident, and now she no longer plays, but she's playing one more time. Masaru, who is up-and-coming star, and then Jin, who is kind of like just a totally natural, just brilliant, does his own way type person. And these are kind of the three major characters, but there's also Mieko, the critic, Nathaniel Silverhorn, who is another critic, and Masaru's maestro, and another participant in the competition, Akashi Takashima, who also plays a substantial role. So in this sense, it's kind of an ensemble based around this competition, and that's really, I think, what saves the book, because if it were just about this core cast of these three, then it would be cloying, because already... I'll just save that for later, for the pros and cons. To whom would I recommend this book to? Because this is pretty much instantly going to segue into the pros and cons, because this is a very, very emotionally saturated book. It's a very sentimental book, and a lot of that comes down to music is very difficult to describe in words. If you go back to my School of Night review, one of the things that I mention is it's very hard to depict one medium in another. So in the School of Night, he's trying to describe a picture using words, and the problem is that a picture is very literal, whereas words leave it to your imagination to kind of fill in the blanks. So no matter how many words you use, you're never going to be able to describe a picture to the extent that everybody is going to see exactly that picture. And so in much the same way, trying to describe music in words is never going to capture that feeling. And so you have kind of two approaches to this, consequently. You either try to capture the emotion that is being conveyed by the art, how it makes you feel, or you try to describe in technical terms what the person is doing. And this book goes heavily, just extremely heavily into the former, to the point where it starts using like metaphors, like, you know, walking through a field, it makes you feel the rain. When I say walk through the fields, I mean it will go on for, they're very, very short paragraphs, describing this sort of journey that the music is taking you on. And I don't mind that once, maybe twice, in a book, because I do understand and appreciate that it can be difficult, and particularly if it was, say, like building up to the big performance, and this was the big performance, then having these kind of really sentimental descriptions wouldn't bother me so much. But the way that they're, for me, because so many pieces are performed, the author just straight out runs out of words to describe things and ways to describe things, in the sense that, like, it's clear, it's a genius performance, this, that, and the other thing. Like, phrases get reused a lot, and it's just, and it's not her fault. It's not that it's badly written. It's just super sentimental for me, and it ends up rubbing me the wrong way to a certain point. I would have preferred something more technical, something that focused more on the mechanical side of things and the complications of it, which there is some of that there. To the book's credit, the reason this review is going to be so long is because they're, for all the criticisms that I have of it, there are pros as well. I did not dislike this book in its entirety by any stretch of the imagination. And trying to sort of capture that dichotomy in a review is going to be difficult, especially half-assed as I do them without a script and off the top of my head. So, coming back to whom would I recommend this to, it's going to be somebody who likes that sentimentality, who doesn't mind an extremely sentimental story, but otherwise anybody with an interest in sort of classical music, in piano music, but that's really more interested in it in kind of a passing sort of way, because I imagine, and this is where, I'm not a musical expert, but if I was left kind of wanting more technical details, then I would assume that people who have more technical knowledge than I do would likewise feel the same, but that's a big assumption on my part. So, in that sense, and also just somebody who, like, okay, I think a lot of anime, and that there's one, like, Kimi no Shigatsu no Uso or something like that, like Your Lie in April. God, it was huge a long time ago. And it reminded me a ton of that, in the sense that just very sentimental, very, had a certain level of insight into the pressures of pianists and concert pianists and whatnot, but wasn't a deep technical dive. At the end of the day, it was still ultimately about music and the role of music in people's lives. So if you liked that anime, if you're the type of person that enjoys, because I've mentioned that that anime was it was just a sports anime, but with music instead of sports, and this book is very, very similar. The big game is just the big performance, and things like that. So if you like those kinds of stories, then I think you can absolutely enjoy this book. And I think that there's a reason, it says on the cover over 1 million copies sold in Japan. There's a reason for that, and it's because in spite of the cons that are going to be very personal to me, the age-old my favorite line, it wasn't for me, a lot of the pros are going to be things that are going to be more broadly appealing. And whereas the things that I'm specifically looking for are going to be more niche and specific to me and my tastes. So getting into that with the pros and the cons. The first big pro with this book is that, and this is a pro for me, mostly coming off of the last several books I've read, where I've struggled to connect with the characters and understand what makes them tick. One of the things that I really have to give this book credit for is, despite having such a large cast of characters, and I don't think that any of them are super deep, and maybe that is one of the reasons that it works so well is the characters aren't super deep unto themselves, but they are each very distinct. And that is huge. I feel like I understand them in a way that I could never connect with some of the characters in, like, Clarissa's book, In the Perfect World, or Water Song. Where those, I didn't understand what made those characters tick. In here, it's very obvious, and you get a really good sense of all the characters and their feelings, despite there being such a large cast, which really, even though the book is 425 pages, is not much space, honestly, for as many characters as there are. So the fact that it balances them all well enough that they do all have distinct personalities, and you really get an understanding of what it is that drives and motivates and the struggles of each one, is really well done, and something I absolutely have to commend. Neutral point that I wanted to bring up, because this, for me, is the single biggest takeaway that I'm going to get from this book, personally, is whenever I've sat down with certain popular Japanese works of fiction, calling it pop fiction versus lit fiction feels a bit crude, but sort of pop lit versus we'll just call it, like, traditional literature. I've noticed something. There's a certain voice, a certain way of writing that makes it very distinctly Japanese to me. And it's not something that I get from Murakami or Mishima or, why am I, like, Akutagawa, Soseki, Kensaburo Oe, and any of those old guard writers. But I got it from Riku Onda, and I might have gotten it from the guy who wrote A Man. I don't remember his name right now. This might have been part of why I was so annoyed with A Man. But I finally was able, reading this book, this was kind of my big challenge reading this book, was understanding what it is, what gives the writing such a distinctly Japanese voice. What is it in reading this that makes me go, yeah, this is discernibly something Japanese? And part of it is the super short paragraph lengths, which is something that I'm not particularly a huge fan of anymore. But again, going back to why I can see this book being popular, it makes for a very clipped reading pace, and it adds to that feeling of saturation, because each line is given so much room to breathe. Because usually if you have a line of text on its own separate from a paragraph, it makes it really stand out. So when you have a whole bunch of things like that, it makes every single thing really, really stand out and feel really powerful and really important. But to me, the way I interpret it is that it becomes too powerful, and it starts feeling insistent. Like it doesn't trust me to understand what's going on. Like it has to slow down and spell everything out, and it's like, I get it. And further adding to that is, and this is the key detail for me that I think is really defines some of this voice that I see in modern literary writers from Japan, is that there will be a description of something, be it a single line or paragraph or whatever, and then afterwards there will be a single sentence, usually on its own, just standing on its own, that not only summarizes what was just said, but will tell you more or less how you should feel about it. And I have a few examples here, but I need to go get my phone, so yay, pause. Okay, I'm back with my phone. I do phone notes. I did a video on that. Check it out. Great way to keep track of things if you do not like physically affecting your books, which I do not. Okay, here we go. And with the third piece, Debussy's Etude Number 5, Pour les Octaves, I don't know French, they were suddenly out in the open. Coupled with Debussy's unique sense of scale, Masaru's dynamicism brought out an incredible emotional expressiveness. The further gear change as he shifted to the final piece, Brahms' Variations. Then a further gear change as he shifted to the final piece, Brahms' Variations. Paganini's theme was presented boldly, confidently, served up surrealistically. Omnidirectional, impeccable, yet with a sense of something still in reserve, the whole imbued with a breathtaking freshness. Kanade marveled at Masaru's confidence. He looked as if he was thoroughly enjoying himself. And then, on a separate line, granted, most of these have been separate paragraphs, but then you have this strict line, his talent actually sparkled. And what is that? That basically is taking everything that was just happening and summing it up in a single sentence, as well as suggesting how you should feel about it. I have another example here. Nathaniel's pupil was truly evolving day to day. The performance that Nathaniel is hearing right now was totally different from what he'd heard a week before. He'd made exceptional progress. Part of Masaru's genius was this inexhaustible room for growth. He never set limits for himself. Every handicap was just fodder for further development. Separate line. Nathaniel was full of admiration and pride. And then this is the last one, and I think this is kind of the most indicative for me. And it begins with italics, so a character's thoughts. But still, I can do what I'm capable of right now. New line. Masaru had this odd conviction. And it's particularly the word odd that leads me to say telling you how to feel, because reading it in this moment, I didn't find anything odd about that conviction at all. I'm not certain what makes it an odd conviction. I don't feel that it's an odd conviction, and I don't personally really appreciate the writer taking the time to tell me that it's an odd conviction. I would rather just be left to figure that out on my own. And the coughs are already starting, so sorry, it's going to be kind of stop and go here with the recording. Assuming I stop at all, apparently. So the thing is about this, I mentioned, if you go back and listen to my A Man review, when I first read A Man, I really, really enjoyed it. But the second time I read A Man, I found it actually incredibly frustrating. That it did not seem to trust me to understand everything. It felt extremely overt. It felt like it was beating me over the head with the point. And this, I'm guessing, is what I was talking about, because there is so much repetition going on here, where it's not just repeating the information of what's happening back at you, but drawing the emotional beats out and telling you how they are and what they are. And it's this that makes the concept of a recommendation really difficult, because there was a time in my life, not when I first read A Man, but 10 years ago when I first started getting into Japanese fiction, when I would have really appreciated this. And I also think it's important to understand the sort of context in which a lot of Japanese novels are written, because a lot of people read on the trains and in public areas, and so it can be difficult to concentrate. So being repetitive in this way, beyond just, this sort of cynical idea of making sure that even stupid people can follow along, like, I don't want to think that cynically about things. I really do think it comes down to writing books in such a way that busy people can still follow along with what's going on. And for a first read through, or if you are particularly busy, it works. It's great. You can read a long book like this with so many moving parts and still keep track of it despite having a busy schedule. And that's why this whole point is neutral, because it really depends on you. Because this is where going back and rereading A Man, even though I enjoyed the book the first time, this particular writing style ends up being incredibly tedious. And the more that I've devolved, perfect Freudian slip right there. The more that I have evolved as a reader, the more I want something that leaves me free to come up with things and interpret meaning on my own, and not having the writer sitting there over my shoulder basically saying, well, this person is good, this is how you should feel about this, this is this. It really, for me, like I said, it just feels insistent. And coupled with the emotional saturation, it's just overkill. And that was the big struggle for me with this book, was that and getting into a con, which I'll tie back into this. But one thing that I think is a con, I already mentioned that there's only so many different ways that you can express one medium in another. There's only so many different ways that you can write about music before you start repeating yourself. And one of the things that I like about the book is the way that it talks about child prodigies in the world and the sort of limits of that, because so many things focus on child prodigies, but not really where they end up or the struggles that they end up facing later on in life. Because the book mentions, there's so many child prodigies, thousands of them, and yet that how many of them really go on to have a successful career in the long run for various reasons. So, cool, the book does not use child prodigy, overuse that phrase, prodigy. Then it falls into that exact same trap with the phrase genius, because you have Jin and Aya, who are both described as being geniuses. And, I appreciate that the book talks about how technical skills only get you so far. That once you reach a certain height and a certain level, technical skills don't matter as much as various other things like interpretation and elements like that. And this is true, and this is something that I we'll put a pin in it. But again, it means that now not only are you limited in describing how something is played, but now you are specifically limited to describing across multiple performances, across at least 10 different performances, the absolute peak of the pinnacle of playing. The vocabulary to describe not just good playing, not just fantastic playing, but the absolute pinnacle of playing. And you're trying to describe this for 10 different performances. And that's where a lot of the redundancy comes in. And it's frustrating that you have somebody, or that you have a book which takes the time to specifically not fall into the trap of talking about child prodigies and how great that is, but then turns around and immediately has one-of-a-kind, not just one one-of-a-kind genius, but two one-of-a-kind geniuses, and probably a third, depending on how you want to define Masaru. It doesn't quite go as hard on his genius as it does Aya and Jin's, but it's nonetheless the way that the book talks about these individuals beyond the sheer unlikeness that they would all meet at this one place and whatnot. It's the way that, because they're described as geniuses, it completely limits the vocabulary of the book. And again, I want to come back and give the author credit for, as I said, having these distinct characters, even though they're all geniuses. You understand their personalities very well, but the problem is that it doesn't really extend into sort of understanding the differences in the way that they perform beyond these extremely vague metaphorical concepts that just they're not realistic. They appeal to emotion way too much for my taste, and I think this really embodies itself for me the most in there's two performances, the performances between Jin and Aya of a piece unique to the book called Ashura and Nature, in which Jin, who goes first, interprets the piece in a very violent way to emphasize nature's violence. And specifically, the person who is thinking about it and listening to it gives credit to him for not just focusing on the warmth of nature, but to also recognize that sort of more violent side to nature and violent side of nature, and to bring it out in his performance and not to fall back on that warm, embracing Mother Earth. And then literally Aya goes up and plays a warm, embracing Mother Earth, and it's treated as this brilliant contrast to Jin, even though the whole point of Jin's was that it was, aside from being brilliantly played, which all of them are, which is why repeatedly making mention of that becomes old very fast, that was the whole thing that made his unique. So for her to then come on and play it that way, it's just frustrating to me. It feels like the author, there just wasn't the language to really convey that. It just hits a point where it's basically it was really, really good. Trust me, bro. And, I'm not saying that it ever degrades to that level of just outright whatever, but like I said, there's just so much you can do with language, and it hit its limit for me really, really early on. But, and, to go back to a pro again, I really did appreciate, in much the same way that I appreciated the information about the child prodigy thing, and not in recognizing how few child prodigies go on to make a career out of it. I appreciated the breadth of the representation of this particular piano concert by bringing in characters like tuners, by having Mieko to give, and Nathaniel to a certain extent, to give the perspective of the judges and what the judges have to do and have to go through. And this is where I mentioned, if it was just focused on Jin, Aya, and Masaru, it would just be like just diabetes-inducing, like, oversaturation of emotion. And having these other elements to the story not only help balance out in terms of the emotional weight of it all, but also in terms of the sort of insight that I appreciate. Because, like I said, there is a lot of research done to the piano stuff and to the performances and whatnot. I don't want to say that she doesn't know her stuff, but whatever she does know, it's still limited mostly so that the layman can enjoy it. And that's great, but as I've kind of said with history in the past, what I really appreciate are books that can, I read them and I come away feeling like I know more about the subject, and I didn't get that in terms of the piano playing itself, but in terms of how a competition is run, I appreciate that. And then this is where we kind of get into a midpoint, which is one of the things that I thumbtacked earlier, which is the problem with art and describing art in this extremely sentimental way, and I've mentioned this in the past, but this is the perfect example, is that art tends to be fairly universal. So when she's talking about the judges and the struggle that they go through when it comes to choosing somebody who wins or loses, and how this comes to ultimately a judge's preference, because their technical skills are all top level, and so it's really hard. You can't make an objective preference at this point, which you can even, and the book does kind of mention, like, which leads to the question of why even have these sort of piano contests in the first place. And the thing is, and this goes with a lot of the descriptions in the book, this applies to art universally. The book even begins with one of the characters, I think it's Mieko, but I don't remember completely, having a conversation with a writer. And it genuinely would not surprise me if this was just a real conversation that the writer had, that Riku Onda had, and that she included in the book, because they're talking about the similarities between their two things. And the writer does concede that music has the benefit of not being limited by a language barrier, which is true, but a lot of these struggles and concepts are ultimately universal in art, because a lot of awards for, like, novels, you have the same problem. Like with the Nobel Prize, it's a global prize. So there are so many people deserving of that type of thing that the idea that only one wins every year is completely obscene in terms of, the actual merit aspect of it. The idea that there's only going to be, one best book or whatever, it's absurd. And it reminds me, and if I can find it, I'll post it in the comments, but it's been years since I've read it. Or not in the comments, in the description. But there was one year when the Pulitzer Prize wasn't handed out. And one of the judges, the way that it worked back then, it may still work this way, I don't know, was that they had a panel of judges that changed every year. And the panel would then select 3 or 4 finalists, send it on to the actual Pulitzer panel, and the panel would then choose from those finalists. And this year, not this year as in 2026 when I'm recording this, but the year that this was written, they did not choose a book from the selection, which pissed a lot of people off, understandably. The panel, rather, the Pulitzer panel didn't, I should say. And one of the judges released a really, really interesting article talking about their thought process when it came to choosing a book. and what for them it meant to choose a winner for the Pulitzer Prize. And it really made me appreciate the amount of thought that they and the other judges put into it. And to see it from their side really made me just think, wow, there's actual integrity here to what they're doing. So huge credit to that. But when it comes to the judges in this, and they're talking about it, it's a lot of the same thing. And the reason that I call this neutral is there's not a problem including it. But it's not just about the judges. I'm using this as an anecdote to explain, and this is what I mean. This is why I didn't read the book for so long. But, whether it's music, whether it's painting, whether it's photographs, whether it's writing, when it comes to the arts, they're all at their core relatively similar, because they're all about, they're all art. They're all human expression. And at that point, once you get beyond a certain point, what you're really looking at tends to be the same, no matter what. So this is where, for me, like the technical side of it becomes more interesting, because I have only so much patience for the emotional side. Because again, like the very end of the book, they talk about the god of music over and over and whatnot, and at the end of the world, it's like, at the end of the book, the world is music. The boy himself was music. He himself, every move he made was music. Music was running. In this astonishing world, music itself raced through the morning stillness, and in a flash was gone. And it's like, okay, that same feeling, that same sentiment can be applied to anything artistic. So it's really difficult for me, to find something that really captures that feeling, that as somebody who's 34, and even when I didn't read books, was still, reading like manga or whatever, to just not feel like I haven't heard this kind of message before. I'm looking for something a bit deeper than just sentimentality, but it's in the neutral spot, because, like I said, it's really going to depend on you, whether or not you gel with this sentimentality. And also to the point of, like I said, I read that Pulitzer article, so for me, I already had this kind of knowledge coming into it. But if you haven't had that kind of knowledge or kind of exposure, then you might not have enjoyed it, or you might actually really enjoy it and find it fascinating. And that's where it gets kind of difficult, and why it's in a neutral point, because maybe there should be something more to it that it manages to keep me engaged, even though I kind of know I already know all this stuff. But maybe that's just me being too harsh. I don't know. Which brings me to the last part of this discussion, which would ordinarily be the themes part. But what I really want to talk about is I actually hit a point at about page 240 or so. Once I figured out what the thing that I mentioned about Japanese writing was. And for the record, I thought maybe this is a translation thing. So I went to the library at the school that I work with and picked up a Japanese copy of the book and flipped it open and read through the passages that I read out. And sure enough, they were there written the exact same way. So it's not a translation thing. It is the way that these things are written. And once I figured that out, the reason I lost pretty much all interest in the book. And this is, if it were not for the fact that I had to do a review, and I know this channel is called One Cheek Books, but I still have certain standards for myself. I said this is a selfish project. This is me talking through a lot of my thoughts, but I still have certain standards for myself, and I'm not going to do a review if I have not finished a book. And I wanted to finish this book, and I say book, but I want to say anything. I'm not going to review anything if I haven't finished it. And I did want to talk about this book in the context of a review, because so much of what I have said already, I had already nailed down and felt and wanted to discuss. But like I said, I'm not going to talk about something unless I finished it. But, and to double down on this, if you go back and look at what when I uploaded my blinding video and when I uploaded Chinaman, neither one was tagged with the review tag. And, the Grapes of Wrath wasn't tagged with the review tag because I didn't feel like I was doing a review of Grapes of Wrath. I felt like I was just talking about my reactions to the Grapes of Wrath. So for me, if I do a review, then I will absolutely make myself finish the book, which makes the book sound bad when I say, and there's a reason that I'm saving this for last. And that's because, as I said in my Chinaman video, there is a sense that if you don't finish a book, that it's then a matter of you didn't like it, or it's really, really bad. And that's not the case for me. Usually I feel like I can learn something from books that are really, really bad. And obviously the fact that I wanted to talk so much about this book and it means that there was something to this book. I did get something out of it. The problem was, once I got out of it what I was going to get out of it, what was left in terms of the actual enjoying the process of reading and the story and the characters on its own wasn't working for me. Because thematically, there's really not a whole hell of a lot going on. It is just the joys of music, specifically in the concert pianist form. There's not a whole lot of thematic complexity to it. There's not various themes being explored. There's just it's just kind of like, what music sure is great. You have these students talking about what kind of musicians they want to become. But again, to my mind, there's not the technical details to really understand that side of the story, or to really feel like, I really can picture where they're going to be in the future. And it's kind of the same thing. Like, everything is so focused around this concert or this competition, rather, that in terms of what's going on in these characters' external lives, you only get enough set dressing to really understand their motivations as it relates to the concert, which, as I said, is fine. It works for the story, but in terms of actually understanding, them outside of the context of this concert, or, outside of the context of piano and whatever, and that means in terms of understanding where they're going to go in their futures and the kind of people that they'll become, that there's not that much. It is just so laser focused on the music, and that's fine. But the biggest sin for me, this is the single biggest sin, when I was not reading the book, I was not thinking about the book, which for me, like, just that's the end. I read specifically for themes. I read specifically to be challenged. I know a lot of people talk about reading for fun, but for me, when I'm going to shut my brain off and I'm going to relax, I play games. That's what it is for me. When I read for serious business only, but I read to think and be challenged. Whether it's in terms of the writing, whether it's terms of exploring something else related to something that I like. That's really what I do. And the reason that I was going to drop this book was just I got what I was going to get out of it. And having read it through to the end, I pretty much did not get anything else out of the last part of the book. But that is so specifically on me, and also on the fact that the book is so specifically focused on this one theme, that it really does. It almost reminds me of a movie or like a single run miniseries in the way that it's so contained and so focused that I can see why it's so popular. And I don't this sounds so pompous, but I don't resent its popularity in any way. I don't regret reading it. I got something out of the experience of reading it, and that's why I absolutely felt the need to review it and the need to talk about it. But outside of that integrity, I would have dropped this book because I think that it only had so much to offer me. And I think for a certain type of reader, it's only going to have so much to offer you. So that's I mean, the fact that this is usually the part where I talk about themes, and there's just nothing that I really feel like talking about. Even there are a few romances in there, but it's surface level at best, and doesn't really delve into, the nature of being in a relationship as a musician, or as a pianist, or as a judge, or whatever. Even the idea that you have a one of the judges has his people in the contest should seem like a conflict of interest. That never comes up. It's mostly just this question of music is really great, and this idea of should music be, like concert music, be interpretive or sort of free-flowing. Interpreted in a literal sense or interpreted in a more free-flowing sense. But I think it's hard to call it a theme because there's so distinctly a bias here that interpreting it in a literal sense is just kind of the established norm, and this is more about going against the norm. So it doesn't really feel like a theme because there's not really any exploration. The sort of strict, it must be interpreted literally. The strict literal interpretation isn't ever given due as a valid sort of option. It feels like it's the sort of only option, particularly embodied in the character Jennifer Chan. So yeah, that's you can tell that I've kind of run out of energy here because I really don't like being negative, and I feel like I'm being negative to the book, but it's really just a situation where, like I said, after a certain point there just wasn't much in it for me. But I don't want to be negative on the author because so much work clearly went into writing this, and it feels like a lot of studying went into it, a lot of passion went into it. And just because I didn't gel with certain things on it, I just don't want to take a dump over all that work, nor do I want to appear unappreciative of the fact that for somebody in a very different context, they could absolutely love it, and a lot of people do. So if it sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and pick it up. Like I said, if you're a fan of that type of anime, absolutely pick it up. If you're a fan of that type of story, pick it up and give it a go. It's a very emotional journey, but I just don't think it's the most thought-provoking journey, and I'm looking for a little bit more of that. So maybe I will get it next week when I read Angry Frenchman. I don't know what to expect from this, but I'm looking forward to it.